Where it is. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to Sports Matters 2017. I'm John Nicholson, the director of the Newhouse Sports Media Center. We have some terrific discussion ahead of us today, and to welcome everybody here, the person who is our leader here at the Newhouse School, my leader, the person without whose support this media center would not exist, to welcome you, Dean Lorraine Branham.
Thank you, John, and thank you for our audience and our students who managed to drag themselves out of bed this morning for this first session. I'm sure some of your colleagues will be making their way here later in the day, but we're happy to have those of you who are here for what is our fourth annual Sports Matters Symposium. And although John has said nice things about me, I have to give him full credit for this symposium, which was an idea that I had that he made happen. And so this is our fourth time doing it. I think it's so important because people tend to think about sports in terms of the game, but we wanted to show people that sports is more than just the game, that there are serious issues in sports, that it's a serious part of our society, and that it's important that we come together from time to time to explore those issues and have conversations about the things that happen off the field, off the court, and in the lives of people who are involved in the game. So thank you all for being here for this. You picked a great day to come to Syracuse for those of you who are from out of town. Normally there'd be about 4 feet of snow outside, but we wanted to have a great day for you so you'd have a good impression of us. So not only do we have sunshine, it's going to be warm today, which is highly unusual in February in Syracuse. So very special to have you here, and the weather is cooperating. Before I say any more, I have to mention one thing that is a little sad for me. John Nicholson, the director of our program and the center, is retiring this year. And I have the, unenviable task of trying to figure out how we will replace him. John is the founding director of this program. All of the things that have happened over the last 4 years has been under his leadership, with his enthusiasm and creativity. It was very important to me for Newhouse to claim its very important sports tradition. And we have a tradition stretching back in sports, stretching back 75 years to Marty Glickman. And we have lots of great people, lots of famous names who all of you know who came out of this school. But we never really did anything to coordinate, organize, and bring them all together. And that is what John has helped to do under the auspices of the Sports Media Center, now in its fourth year, and our sports communications emphasis, which gives our students an opportunity to really study and prepare to go out in the world of sports media, and with this symposium where we explore important issues. If you have a chance to check out our Sports Media Center, you will see that we have the names of more than 500 of our alumni who are currently working in the field. Every year we turn out a new batch of students who want to go out and make their marks and become the next Mike Tirico or Bob Costas or whatever. So it's been a great run. John, thank you for all you have done to make this happen. I keep thinking that maybe I should rescind his retirement and keep him on a while longer because he truly is irreplaceable. So I'd like a round of applause for John. We do wish him well in his retirement, but it's also going to be a sad time for us to see him leave the school. He's been here a long time, involved not just with this, but also in teaching in our broadcast program, and he's been such an important part of the Newhouse School, and we're sad to see him go. Having said that, on with Sports Matters, and sports actually does matter, even though some people think it's just a game. This is the fourth time we've done this. We have a great lineup of folks here today. If you have your program, you see there are going to be 3 interesting panels talking about sports as news, and the things that happen in sports that are newsworthy. The great Roger Kahn wrote that sports tells anyone who watches intelligently about the times in which we live, about managed news and corporate politics, about race and terror, and what the process of aging does to strong men. If that sounds grim, there's courage and high humor too, and we hope all of that is reflected in the Sports Matters Symposium. And I think you'll see proof of that here today. Thank you all, our panelists and our other folks who are here for coming. We're honored to have you here today. And some of you are alums, some of you are not. We're grateful for your participation, and we look forward to what you have to say. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dean Branham, for those kind words. I'll pretend to be humble, but we haven't got time for that foolishness. Everything we hear today, everything that's said today is on the record. We encourage you to take pictures, to tweet. The hashtag is hashtag Sports Matters, as you can see down here or up there in the corner on the big screen. After the conclusion of the discussion, there will be, of course, the moderator talking with the panelists about the topic at hand. And we'll invite our other panelists from later in today, mostly now seated in our front row here, to join in. And we invite you to join in with your questions, comments. This is a discussion, and it is very important that our students and faculty be involved in it as well. It means the world to us that each one of you is here. So thank you, and please get involved. The moderator of our first panel is one of my colleagues who survives by giving me a hard time about any number of things. He is also one of our excellent teachers. I wouldn't single out anybody, honestly, on our faculty, but Simon is relatively new to us compared to geezers such as myself, and has been a wonderful influence on our students. He is not a sports professor, but he is a sports fan, and he has been through some interesting experiences, which I think he may tell you about in the course of the conversation. I'm counting on him to do a terrific job, which is why I picked him, right, Simon? Here's Professor Simon Perez.
All right. I'm in my pockets here. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming. I think we're going to have a really interesting discussion that kind of goes to the heart of what it is that we do in the Newhouse School, and especially in the journalism program when it comes to sports and how to cover sports and how to be a journalist first and then be able to apply those journalism skills to whichever subject you might find interesting or might want to apply it to, or that your boss tells you you should apply it to. So we've got some great panelists today who are going to help illuminate what happens when it is that sports suddenly turns into news coverage. So let me bring them out one by one as I introduce them. The first person we have on the panel is Erika Wachter. She is a weekday reporter and weekend anchor in the sports department at Fox 5 in New York City. Welcome, Erika. She got started out of school as a production assistant at ESPN, and from there she's worked as a sports reporter at WTNH in New Haven, at the University of Connecticut, and a variety of other outlets, including New England Sports Network, Verizon, Fios, One Sports, and Connecticut Public Television Sports. She is an SU alum. Welcome, Erika. Our next panelist is Jason Dumas. Jason is the sports director at WHAG in Hagerstown, Maryland. Before that, he worked in sports at TV stations in North Dakota and Louisiana, and like Erika, he got started out of school as a production assistant at ESPN. He's covered the Sugar Bowl and the NBA playoffs, and he is an SU alum. Welcome, Jason. Patti Kleinman-Fallick works at the United States Tennis Association as Senior Director of Broadcast Operations. Before that, she helped launch the MLB Network and also worked with the National Hockey League Broadcast Operations Department and with NBC Sports. And the theme is she is also an SU alum. Welcome, Patti. And our final panelist is John Wildhack, who is currently the SU Athletics Director. But before that, he was Executive Vice President for Programming and Production at ESPN. And while at ESPN, he oversaw the first live regular season college football game on the network first live college football game. Anybody want to take a guess? Not who, that's a good one, Syracuse.
Good guess, though.
I don't know if he had that much pull, he might have. 1984 was the first live college football game, and also the first live NFL game on the network in 1987. And he is also an SU alum. So welcome to all of our alums, and thank you for participating. This panel is entitled Sports is News, How Do We Prepare for When Sports Rises to the Level of News? And I think probably the most famous example of that is the 1972 Olympics, when the coverage and the attention turned from Mark Spitz winning 7 gold medals in swimming to a terrorist attack. And I did a little bit of research, and I found an interesting article that explains sort of what was going on behind the scenes, coverage-wise, when this event happened. So let me read a little bit to you from the New York Times Magazine article that describes what happened. After the assault happened, Roone Arledge, who was then president of ABC Sports, which was broadcasting the games in the United States, had a choice of whom to put in the anchor's chair in the network studio, which is about 100 yards from where the hostages were being seized. A young Peter Jennings, who had already served a brief stint as ABC's news anchor and was then the network's Mideast correspondent, was part of the Olympic team coverage. Also available was Chris Schenkel, ABC's Olympics host in Munich, and Howard Cosell. Instead, Arledge would later recall, he told one of his producers, order the satellites, get everybody back, and most of all, get Jim McKay. McKay, who was 50 at the time, was best known as host of ABC's Wild World of Sports, which is a brilliant confection of high and low athletic competition that brought events like soccer's World Cup, international track and field to American audiences, as well as wrist wrestling, demolition derby, barrel jumping, and the annual cliff diving competition from Acapulco that seemed to be won by the same guy every time. But Arledge had worked closely with McKay for a decade after plucking him from relative anonymity to host worldwide, and he knew his broadcaster began his professional life as a police reporter for the Baltimore Evening Sun. McKay's first words when he came on the air that morning from Munich reflected the specificity of someone who had been schooled in the who, what, when, and where of old-time newspapering. Quote, I'm Jim McKay speaking to you live at this moment from ABC headquarters just outside the Olympic Village in Munich, West Germany. The peace of what had been called the Serene Olympics was shattered just before dawn this morning at about 5 o'clock, when Arab terrorists armed with submachine guns, faces blackened, a couple of them disguised as guards or as trashmen in the Olympic Village, climbed the fence, went to the headquarters of the Israeli team, and immediately killed one man, Moshe Weinberg, a coach. 2 shots in the head, 1 in the stomach. That was what he had to say instead of talking about Mark Spitz and swimming and track and field and all the other Olympic sports. So as a way to get started and as a way to get us in the mindset of what happens when you expect to do sports and you end up covering something hard news, that's the theme of our talk today. So I thought I'd start by asking the panelists sort of to confirm that this stuff happens regularly and not just back in 1972 at the Olympics, and ask them to jump in as you like. Do you guys have any examples of when that happened? You went to a story, you were organizing coverage, and then what you thought was going to be sports ended up being something else. Any of you?
Well, I think for ESPN, probably one of the seminal moments was the World Series in San Francisco and the earthquake. And ABC was totally knocked off the air. Al Michaels was play-by-play, was knocked off the air. We were there with Sports Center, news operation, and we were the only ones on generator power. So we actually had power and we had a signal. And Bob Lee immediately went into as a news reporter. We had the only live pictures, the only live reporting out of San Francisco, and I don't know how many hours he did, totally uninterrupted. So, an hour and a half before that, it's World Series, whatever it was, Game 4. Then all of a sudden, the only national coverage of a devastating earthquake in San Francisco is we've got 2 cameras and 1 reporter, and we immediately and instinctively you go into a hard news mode, and we're fortunate fortunate to have someone of Bob's journalistic ability to do that.
And whoever said get the generator got a raise after that.
They got promoted.
They got promoted. Yeah, no kidding. All right. Just by way of background, the two panelists to the right, to your left, to my right, come at this sort of from the management point of view, and the two panelists to your right and my left come at it from the reporter point of view. So I'm wondering if there have ever been any times where you've had to change conversations from when you thought it was going to be something sportsy and it turned out to be newsy.
Well, for me, it wasn't exactly a story that broke and suddenly you had to change from, sports to news. This kind of happened over time, but when I first started at ESPN, one of the biggest stories of that year was the whole Jerry Sandusky case over at Penn State. And it's funny that he brought up Bob Lee. I was working on Outside the Lines for a couple of months during that whole story and it unfolding. And it was just amazing to see, Bob get his journalistic skills, and it was a very, it was leading newscast, especially out in the Altoona, Penn State area. So that was hard news, and you just always have to remember, even though sports is entertainment, at the core we're journalists, and that was a key example of remembering that and having to always have that journalistic integrity. And sports fans are diehard fans, so especially at Penn State. So you just, you had to put all of that aside and forget about, the entertainment value of sports. And you have to report hard news and cover hard news and get the facts out. That's our responsibility to our viewers. And so I saw all of that unfold, and that just reminded me that we're journalists at the core.
Right. To build on that, something as simple as the Charles Oakley things that have been happening with the New York Knicks. I know it's not necessarily to the same level, but I think anytime the legal matter gets in, the game is just to the wayside, and then we're sitting there every day following up. What's the latest? What charges may he be facing? And it's just a different angle of how you cover it. The Knicks necessarily aren't a team that is doing very hot anyway, but it just kind of adds to the whole drama of things that can happen in sports. But it's usually, for me, in my experience so far, has just been when something turns into a legal matter, whether it's something an athlete did or is accused of. That's been most my experience of having to step outside the game coverage into a more serious coverage.
So you're thankful for something else to talk about besides the Knicks game?
Yeah.
Anything else? Anything else? All right, so it's obvious this stuff continues to happen, right? It wasn't just the Olympics. There are moments where things are surprising and happening up to this day. So I'm wondering if you guys might be able to talk about what are the skills that are required to cover a sporting event, and what are the skills that are required to cover a news event. Are they different? Are they the same? Are there any that are different? Or are they all the same?
I think at MLB Network, we took a really, serious approach to making sure that we could cover both sides, and that meant that we had journalists on staff as well as sports broadcasters. So whether it be, Tom Verducci or Ken Rosenthal was as, involved as Harold Reynolds was. And making sure that they had the support staff behind them, the researchers and the legal resources and the people that they could call upon as experts, whether it be in medical issues with steroids or whatever it could be, making sure they had the background and the resources to help them do their job on air.
What are the skills that Verducci has that Reynolds doesn't?
He's a journalist. It's a bit different background. Harold is great, but he comes in from the sports side, and he's a sports anchor. But it's just different skill set. Although they cross over at different times.
Right.
So but it's making sure that they go on air and they're knowledgeable about what the subject matter is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'll say, Jason touched on it. A journalist is a journalist. So in that case where it's more of a former player becoming part of the broadcast team, we're taught how to be a reporter. That's our passion. We're inquisitive. So I think that is a similar trait regardless. When you're watching a game, sure, it's fun. You're getting to just watch football or watch basketball, and then, ask your questions related to that. So maybe the questions aren't as hard hitting, but we still need to ask questions to determine what the story is. And I think that's very similar. But when something does become more breaking news, sports is our forte. That's what we enjoy doing. And when it becomes something that maybe you have a little less experience with, you're a little less familiar, I think it's just depending on a lot of your colleagues. For me in the newsroom, I lean to, Darrell Rivas the other day, I leaned to some of my colleagues who had worked in Pittsburgh or who had really been in that beat with the police and kind of how do I go about getting this information, because it's a little different for me. I'm not used to having to call up a PIO and ask them for certain information about an arrest. But I still think questions are questions, and we're reporters, it's our job to find the story and deliver it.
I think anybody, if your love is sports, that's great, but I think you've got to have some journalistic background because it's just inevitable. It's not if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen. If anything, it happens more on a frequent basis now more than ever. So I think that's critically important. One of the things we had at ESPN was we had a very robust news operation. Very robust, and we had our assignment editors, we had our news desk. Everything was vetted through them. I would often call, depending on what the subject matter was, I might call our general counsel. Help us write this so we write it in the right, with the right legal, phrase, right? We started to interact more with ABC News. When I moved back to production, developed a good relationship with Ben Sherwood and then James Goldson, who succeeded Ben. Is all right, how can we kind of combine resources of ABC News and ESPN? How can we have talent appearing on ABC, whether it might be GMA, it might be World News Tonight. We might want some of their talent appearing on Sports Center. So we kind of looked to combine the editorial resources, not just of what ESPN had, but also what ABC News had. And I think in doing so, I think it made us smarter.
I think it's worth emphasizing the point that Patti made, and maybe you can talk to our students about this. And this is not in any way disparaging one skill set or another. It's just saying that they're different skill sets. When you're a manager and a story breaks, you can't just send anybody to go cover the story, right? There's a certain skill set that as the manager's like, we don't want to get sued and we don't want to blow this story, so I'm going to send the person with what kind of skills? What are the journalism skills, right? Yeah.
Critical, absolutely critical.
There are times that, I can remember times where things break when you're not prepared, when it's the weekend lone anchor at the desk and it's the junior person and it's like, wow, what do we do? And we, to John's point, we always make sure we had a news assignment group and researchers on staff to support them, and then quickly scramble to get them the rest of the resources. But for that time period, until all the resources were available to them, they had to, do their best attempt at being the journalist and being, neutral and just reporting the facts as they knew them. But it was, challenging, definitely at times.
And so, sometimes, there might be some noise out there, that something's going to happen, right? I'd probably use FIFA as an example and Sepp Blatter, and there is kind of a building crescendo that in so well in advance of ultimately, right, when he was taken into custody, I'm like, we're going to have a plan in place. This may not happen, but let's assume it does happen, and what are we doing, right? Who's the talent? Who's the primary talent? Who's the backup talent? Who's our analyst? Let's leverage the talents of our international networks as well, because their perspective on FIFA, I think, is very, very important because of how important soccer is, globally. And we had a robust and detailed plan in place. And sometimes you can do that, and if you have the luxury of doing that, if you can anticipate in advance and you can put that plan in place, then when it happens, then you've got to execute it.
I'm thinking of this idea that we train our students here at Newhouse, as I said earlier, to be journalists first, and they've got these skills that they can then apply to sports or to fashion or to international relations or finance, whatever it is that they want to do that, want to do with it. I'd like to elaborate a little on what some of those skills are. I mean, Erika, you talked about asking questions. What kind of questions is it that the journalist asks that the regular fan might not? What kind of background does the person? What kind of background knowledge does the person have to have? Just as you think through this, and you think when you guys are assigning certain people to cover a story and not others, what is it? What is being a journalist? What are those skills that they need to have?
Well, it's funny, when you're covering sports, especially as, an on-air talent, you're always told, remember, sports, have fun, have fun. I hear that all the time, Professor Nicholson, have fun. We're talking about sports. When hard news breaks in the sports field, that mindset has to go out the window because it's not fun anymore. If the coach of this high school team got in a physical altercation with one of his players, parents are going to be tuning into the news to find out what happened, because this guy is also a teacher and he's around their children. So it's not have fun anymore. It's find out the who, what, when, where. It's our jobs to inform people. And that just goes back to the core. We're journalists at a core. So you just have to be more inquisitive. You can't be worried about, obviously, never lose your integrity, but you can't be worried about offending somebody because people, it sounds cliche, but people really do rely on us to find things out, and it's a responsibility. So you always have to have that integrity, and you have to just, inform your viewership on what happened. How did those two get in a physical altercation? Why did that coach put his hands on the student? Is he going to get fired? Should he get fired? That's up to them to decide, but you just have to lay it all out there.
I'm thinking one of the differences might be, or one of the pitfalls might be the idea of the relationship you have with the coach.
Right.
Talking about wins and losses might be different than talking about, did you punch the parent?
Yes.
And is one of them harder than the other? How do you buck up to do it?
Right. It's definitely not easy. If you developed a great working relationship with this coach, maybe he's been very successful. You interview him all the time, for sports features and covering his games, and then he's in the center of a controversy. It's obviously not easy. It gets a little uncomfortable, but this is what we get paid to do, and that's, is our responsibility to our viewership, to our employer who is paying us to do this job, and that always comes first. And sometimes you're going to be in awkward situations, but you should know that going in. It's not always comfortable, but it's the job we've been assigned to do.
I think to build on that too, though, having that relationship, which is this business is all about building the relationships, building your contacts. It's almost like you've built a bit of a more rapport with that specific coach. So sure, it's a tougher subject that you're going to have to discuss with them, but it's also, if you've nurtured that relationship enough, they know they can trust you to properly tell it, rather than just someone else coming in not familiar with that person, not familiar with how maybe to ask them the question properly, and then it's just kind of more of maybe they feel like they don't know, they're a little more on guard. You can get them to kind of open up more. So while it's difficult because you can't have that fun with them, it's also a benefit to have been covering them and then have that rapport.
The trust is there.
Yeah.
It's where credibility, right? Credibility is so important that it may be a really tough topic that you're talking to a coach, a player, whomever, but if your body of work has established a credibility in the eye of the subject that the person you're interviewing, they will respect that. I mean, one of the times I can remember that at ESPN is, when Tiger Woods, right, when everything happened, at his home in Orlando and all that. In the first interview that he gave was with Tom Rinaldi. And Tiger's agent, Mark Steinberg, who I knew well, Mark called me and he said, Tiger's prepared to do something, sit down with Rinaldi for like 10 minutes. And I said, fine, understand, there are no conditions on this, none whatsoever. And to Mark's credit, he said, I got it. And Tom asked him every difficult and appropriate question. And after that interview, they had a good relationship prior to that interview. If anything, after that interview, Tiger's respect for an oldie increased because of the credibility that Tom had and it established with him. And I think if you're a reporter, that's what you want, that's the type of relationship and reputation that you should aim to achieve.
Not easy, though.
Really hard,
Right.
really, really hard.
I think that's one of the things probably students and beginning reporters have a hard time doing is getting that courage to know that, as you said, Jason, this is my job. Not only am I getting paid to do it, but this is what the public is expecting me to do.
Right.
And if I don't, I'm failing them. And then what have I got after that?
Right.
Why would they come back to me after that?
And it's hard to build up that trust, but it's very easy to lose it. So that's also something you have to keep in mind.
So those are sort of the journalism skills, right? The ethics, being able to ask the hard questions, establishing contacts and rapport, establishing relationships. What about sort of the subject matters that sports reporters might need to know when news starts to break out, whether it's law or finance or crime? What are some of the things that, whether it's in your research teams or in the good reporters that you know that you could assign to go cover some type of hard news story? What background is it that they have, and what knowledge of what subject knowledge do they have to be able to go do that and be reliable?
I think they have to try to know a little bit about everything, which is kind of what I always tell students at Syracuse. Knowing a little bit about the finance world, knowing a little bit of legal, but also knowing where the line is of what you can say and what you can't say, and to John's point, going to the experts, making sure you're checking with your legal expert, your finance expert, or calling a doctor if it's a medical issue or a drug issue. Just making sure you're really buttoned up on your facts, and before you talk about something, make sure you know what you're talking about.
And I think it's all, and to just jump on that for a second as well, to add to that, is to know what you don't know
Exactly.
is really
Huge.
important. Where you can then, then you can go to someone, you can go to the editor, you can go to the expert on the subject matter to help shape your reporting. Because if you're just kind of, well, hey, here's my opportunity, and I'm gonna, it can be a career killer if you get it wrong. So know what you don't know, and be very, very thoughtful in how you report in the words, in your choice of words.
Right.
And it's very easy to get emotionally connected and emotionally involved, and really, remembering your role and is to, I'm a journalist, this is not my role to talk about things that emotionally I might feel. We had some incidents recently where some young baseball players died tragically, and everybody knew them and everybody really liked them and were emotionally connected, but we didn't know the facts of how they died and how the accidents happened and what was, were drugs or alcohol involved. So you have to be really careful when you're in those situations.
I'm going to imagine that the amount of what the sports reporter doesn't know is a lot bigger when we leave the game and we start going to cover these other news. I mean, if you're every day you're covering the Knicks, the players forwards and backwards and the stats forwards and backwards, because that's your beat. You're doing it every day. And then bam, Charles Oakley happens, just to give the example, that suddenly you're treading on thin ice. Thin ice is probably the metaphor. It's like, whoa, now I'm going to some things that I might not know as well. What are the red flags for when that comes up, and what do you do?
For me, I think it was just asking more questions. So that is my beat. That's what I know. That's where my comfort zone is. But while we have the preparation, you're not necessarily used to that daily use of having to cover that new area for you, the new realm. So when I'm writing my scripts, I make sure to ask more questions or have someone else, have more people proofread it, making sure everything is exactly what it needs to be. I may have a general gist, but why sacrifice your reputation, your career by just kind of putting it out there because you're afraid? Don't be nervous to, when you're speaking with someone, even like the PIO, to make sure, this isn't my usual beat, so sorry if I'm if a little bit more uninformed, but there's no shame in that because you're making sure you have all the information you need to be able to deliver the story properly. So I think that's kind of my biggest thing, is just asking more questions.
Yeah, you got to make sure you get it right because, you know, you're on the phone with a PIO. What's the difference between battery and assault, and what's this and what's that? Because, you know, one, especially when it comes to legal stuff, you accuse someone of, you know, and you say battery instead of assault, thinking, oh, it's the same thing, but it's not. You know, there's differences. So you just have to make sure you get it right because once you lose, you know, once you get it wrong, that's when you lose the trust of the viewers, you lose the trust of the people who you cover. They're not going to, you know, it's going to make your job harder if the people who you interact with every day don't trust you. So you just make sure you get it right, and that comes from asking questions and never think you know something. You always have to know you know it, you know, never assume.
And we're all news consumers, so I think you know the terminology, but I think that's the biggest difference of terminology, where if you were to just throw a regular news reporter into do a sportscast, you would notice a little bit of a difference. Mm-hmm. So it's the same thing, just making sure you understand all the terms, the proper, you know, legalities to it.
Are the consequences greater if you say assault instead of battery versus you say they scored 81 points when it was really 80?
At the end of the day, it's wrong. So you just got to make sure you get it right.
Although I would say, I mean, yes, I mean, you want to be factually correct in everything you do, but it's, in a way, it is sports. It's still, life will move on. You know, you can just kind of make that correction where maybe if you're saying someone was accused of this or you're saying they did this, that's kind of attacking a character of a person without knowing. So I think it's a little bit greater. It is greater.
You got to kind of, you know, you have to balance, right? Because you want to be first, right? And we used to talk about that a lot. You want to be first, but most important, get it right.
Right.
You know, if you're second, but you get it right, that's okay. If you're first and you get it wrong, not okay.
Right.
Go ahead,
Right.
jump in. Do we have a mic? Do we want to go with another mic for the audience? We have an audience question. Yeah. Do you want to? Who has it? Zach. You want to bring it up to the front, and then you can ask your question in a second.
Watch your step now.
The question was: is there a different consequence to saying that somebody was accused of something versus saying they did it? And saying they scored 80 points when they really scored 81. Is there a difference?
I think when you're talking about legal situations and saying assault, battery, someone did something, you're flirting with slander if you're wrong, and that has legal consequences. Saying the score incorrectly is making a mistake and has no legal consequences.
Interesting. Can you tell us your background and who you are so everybody can know?
I'm just a news editor.
Oh, come on.
Just a news editor. So
I'm on a panel later, Claire Smith.
Great. And so, I mean, it sounds like from the manager's point of view, I mean, sort of the radar goes up, and you're like, we got to make sure, and let's make sure we get three extra sets of eyes on this one because the consequences are greater. Right.
Yeah, I mean, with breaking news, we always had in the control room, and being able to speak into the anchor's ears were lawyers. You know, we even had president of the network was a lawyer, but we always brought in legal experts, medical experts, make sure nobody misspoke because it's so critical not to get it wrong.
Interesting. During the breaking coverage,
During the coverage, I mean, to John's point, sometimes we did have the luxury of having the heads up that a story was going to break at some point. So, you know, every day you'd go in, sometimes you'd be covering baseball and sometimes you'd be covering, you know, breaking news, and you just had to be prepared. But yes, during the coverage, making sure that they had the right information at all times and that nobody misspoke. And if somebody did misspeak, to quickly correct it.
Zach, did you have a question?
No, I'm
No?
I'm just
All
not
right. Going back to the terminology, I mean, it just dawned on me, you know, the idea of baseball. I'm just thinking of, students who want to go into sports coverage and their ideas about World Series and playoffs and strikeouts and no-hitters, and then they say, well, good, the labor agreement is coming up, let's go cover that. Wait, that's not what I signed up for.
Right.
Is that what they signed up for?
They kind of did sign up for that.
Yeah?
I mean, I think it depends what your role is. If you're an ex-player and you're an analyst, probably not so much. But then again, there are, things that cross over with the legal side and with player issues and players' union issues, and being informed of all those consequences and legalities is key. I don't think you'd expect them to be the experts, but I think they need to be knowledgeable about the issues.
And can you state the obvious? How do you get knowledgeable about the issues?
You read a lot, and you rely again on the people that work closely with you, the researchers, your news assignment desk, and your executives and your producers to give you that background.
Yeah.
And make sure you're prepared.
I think if you're at MLB or United States Tennis Association or ESPN, that idea of this team behind you is a really nice concept. For those of us who are just starting out, it's like you in the mirror, and that's it. So how do you guys get ready for these other things? What is the research that you do?
Well,
Or even in your first job, you were talking about how you have other folks, Erika, but in your first job, when you're out there and you're it,
Right.
you were the sports department.
Right.
How are you finding this stuff out?
That's when it goes back to networking and stuff. Whether it's a mentor who who you rely on for advice, or even if it's a news director. Me, even though I'm in sports, I always go to my news director and ask him questions. Is it okay if I say this? Or how should I go about reporting this story? You're never the smartest person in the room. So you always have to rely on somebody. And there's no shame in that. They actually, the people who we rely on for that information, I find that they enjoy, giving their help and using their knowledge. They've been in the business for 35 years. They've seen a lot. So never be afraid, to ask for help. And it's just, you do that every day and you do that enough, and you get through the hard times, and there's times where you're not so sure because you have people to lean on.
So even in the smallest place, there's somebody there, maybe not in the sports department, but there's somebody else for you.
Correct. There's always somebody. And if it's not directly at, in your station, you can give somebody a call. There's somebody along the way who I'm sure has helped you, or, wow, they've covered this market before, they've been in this situation, ask for help.
Right.
Professor Wright.
Yes,
Looking
good
forward to
morning
hearing from you.
to our great panel. Nice having all of you here this morning. Jason, Patti, Erika, and John, love you guys, doing a great job here at SU. Everybody's a journalist all of a sudden. Having been in the business a long time and still love it, and still a rookie trying to learn about it, and looking at all the incredible source materials now, everybody's got a camera. Everybody's got a phone. And of course, having covered sports, when you talk about athletics, athletes can present some of the most incredible scenarios that you ever want to see when it comes to a thing called life. How do you handle a situation where, well, let's just give a hypothetical situation of an athlete who is a superstar on a team. All right, quarterback of a big NFL team or college team, everybody knows him or she. And here's a big nightclub. Nothing good happens after what? 2 o'clock in the morning?
Midnight.
Midnight, okay, let's move to midnight. Nightclub is rocking, the DJ is playing, this star athlete is there at the table with, just every kind of vice and corruption that could ever be expected to be, and everybody's got a camera. And here it goes, the after 12 midnight scenario happens. What are our controls today with regards to all of the new technological devices? And everybody seems to be a reporter now. And of course, when this incident goes down, I look up and everybody's got their cameras, aimed at the situation. You're back at the news desk at the radio or television station, and stuff starts coming in. How do we control for this? What do we do now? in this situation called 2017 with all these source materials. The old days when I got in, they said you needed, 3 credible sources about a incident, and we kind of investigated that. But now this thing called breaking news and the instantaneous equipment that we have now, how do we handle this? And I mean, I don't know. I'm just watching it and wondering, what do we do now with all of the sources of information technologically that will go into the newsroom? And in this case, sports. We got this big superstar athlete, and again, nothing happens after 12 midnight. How do we handle this?
I think John said it first. Is always most important. It's more important to be right than to be first. You know, if you're the second person to break that story, and you're right, it's better than being the first and being wrong. So, you know, an athlete might be out of a club and something happens, it gets in a fight or whatever the case may be, and 1 million people posting a video on Twitter, rather than saying, oh, you know, this athlete beat up this guy in the club because that's what the video shows. Figure out what happened. You know, it's obvious. Everyone sees the video. It's obvious, you know, to some capacity what happened. But make sure you're right. Make sure you find the details surrounding it before you start putting out information. You know, it's just better to be correct. Think about that first before being the first one to get some information out, because even if you delete a tweet, people can screen grab that tweet and it's going to be out there forever. Jason Dumas, reporter, accused this athlete of beating up somebody, blah, 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 when the situation was he was trying to rip somebody off a girl. You know, just be right, because that's the most important. And in this age where everyone has a phone and everyone can screen grab stuff, you can't delete anything. You know, you delete that tweet, 5,000 people have already screen grabbed that. That's going to be on Twitter floating around forever. Whenever you say anything from there, you'll have people on Twitter tweeting that picture at you of that wrong tweet you had about a year ago. So it follows you everywhere, so just make sure you're right before you put out information.
That goes the same for journalists, to be careful what you send out on Twitter, what you put out on Facebook, what videos you post, because it doesn't go away, and having to, you know, have things misinterpreted or you know, insulting a player or being, you have to be really careful. Your personal opinion is not necessarily your personal opinion when you're on the air.
Right.
When you're the face of a network or a TV station.
I mean, I'm a little bit torn on it. I'm not sure the exact scenario in the question, but it's also, I think, a good resource where it is kind of just over-massing everything that's out there, but if they have video of a certain instance, I think you've got to utilize it. If you weren't there, we don't have a camera there, depending on what the actual circumstance is, why not use it? It's video. It's better than me just trying to describe something that we could see. And also have to build on the social media fact where you're saying be careful of what you post. Certain things like that, if you look at like the Giants boat trip, like look what that turned into. These athletes themselves are putting videos and pictures out there that are asking for us to take and to use and to make a story out of. Yeah.
So,
I think yeah, Rick asked a great question, because technology is just, it's made it so much more complicated, right? Because everybody is out, everybody's got a cell phone, and you know, ultimately you get something like that, you got to vet it, you got to vet the credibility, you got to vet the credibility of the video. I mean, there are times when we've run with stories, and there are times we said, you know what, no, we're not comfortable, we're not going with this. And I'm not sure there's, you know, there's a list of do's or don'ts there. You know, it's part of it again is you know, surround yourself with really smart people, debate, digest, you know, go into excruciating detail before you decide to go with something. And in terms of just what you all post on you know, whether it's, you know, Snapchat or Twitter or Facebook or whatever, I guarantee you, I mean, one of the things with ESPN, before we'd hire anybody, one of the background checks was, you know, we go to that person, you know, all right, their social media pages, what's on there? Because if there's something that was, you know, it was just totally inappropriate, you're disqualified from being a candidate. Doesn't matter what job, what department, whatever. So don't make a mistake in what you post that can come back to haunt you.
So just a quick follow-up. How does this differ when you're dealing with amateur athletes as opposed to professional athletes, and just the issues that brings up?
I think the same parameters apply. Whether it's a college athlete or a high school athlete or whatever. Again, is the authenticity, and you've got to do the work. You've got to do your background work. I mean, one of the things the ESPN did is they showed the video of the Oklahoma running back, which is absolutely just horrific. After that surfaced, it was appalling. And in my opinion, they did the right thing.
Same thing with Ray Rice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Go ahead, sure.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to follow up on that. What happens, and I think this is for Mr. Wildhack or Ms. Kleinman-Fallick, when you're a business partner of a league or when you're an extension of a league, what happens when sports is at odds with business, with the Ray Rice tape, with top pitching prospect Matt Bush, runs over someone driving under the influence? How do you balance that, your business partnership with the news value?
I will tell you, interesting, when we first launched MLB Network, that subject did come up. There were some questions about how we were going to be MLB Network and part of the Major League League. And Commissioner Salick, right from the start, came and met with a small group of us, and he said, I want you to have journalistic integrity. I want you to be right when you report a story. I want you to, do your homework. But at the end of the day, that's your job, and I might not always agree with some of the things you might have to say or talk about, but as long as you're telling the truth and you've done your homework, I'm okay with it. And we heard that before we launched, and everybody kind of took that to heart. We were always very careful to make sure that we checked and got our facts right and did our homework, but there were times we were definitely at odds with the league. I credit him for giving us that opportunity to have that journalistic integrity. And again, it was definitely times it was tough.
One of the things at ESPN, I would have conversations, and frankly, I had some really difficult conversations with league partners, professional, collegiate, whatever, over the years. And I just said, hey, one of the foundations of our company and one of the expectations of our viewers is that we're going to have a robust and accurate, news operation. And as part of that, we're gonna cover stories that you may not like. We would give a league a heads up and always an opportunity to come on and appear, whether it be SportsCenter, whether it be outside the lines, et cetera, that type of thing. We would always. I was adamant about that. Is call. Let's see if does this entity, will they put a representative on air? If they want on air, will they release a statement? Give us a statement that we can read. But we never, we never pulled back on a story because of pressure or discontent the league showed or conveyed to us about a particular story.
I think in theory, obviously that's the standard that we all would strive for, but in reality, that's not the case. I used to do a talk show on ESPN radio in Dallas, and I quit that job after I was told I couldn't talk about Ben Roethlisberger's second rape allegation. ESPN had sent down the directive. I didn't get the message, so I did about 20 minutes on this young man's future. And then they come running into the studio and telling me that we can no longer talk about it. So I walked off the air, and it wasn't exactly a Dan Rather moment, but I quit at the end of the show. The Fan, the radio station, carries the Dallas Cowboys games on the broadcast. You will never hear a discouraging word about the Dallas Cowboys on the radio station. My simple point I'm trying to make is that I've been accused of, a man asked me one time, a newspaper critic, if I was an entertainer or a journalist, and my answer was yes. And I think it's difficult, as Jason points out, but especially in sports, I think we have to wear these two hats. And I've never cared, and to finish up on a point that Erika had made, I never care what people think about me if I'm doing my job. If they don't respect the fact that I'm doing my job, I have very little respect for them. And I think too many sportscasters in particular have that concern. You don't see people at the White House concerned about what Spicer thinks about them. They're doing their job. Too many people in sports are cheerleaders and want to curry favor with the players and the teams they cover, and they're afraid sometimes to do their jobs. And unfortunately, I can give you instance after instance, because I just wish I'd only been in this business 35 years, but it goes longer than that. But it's a fascinating topic, and I think you're touching on all the right points. I really do.
The one thing that I would not allow our talent to do is to get personal. Is if, as soon as you cross the line from editorial to a personal attack, whether it's a coach, whether it's an owner, whether it's a commissioner, that was out of bounds to me. That was out of bounds to me. And the time that I oversaw production and editorial, I never sent one memo to anyone in the company that's saying this is off limits. I never did that. And I only ran it for 4 years.
I want to build on something Dale said as well. I mean, I worked for the University of Connecticut, so I was their reporter. And I would get in trouble if I wanted to say something that, as a TV reporter or any other type of normal sports reporter, you would be presenting both sides. It wasn't allowed. And it was something that I kind of, internally tried to fight for a bit, but the reality is when you're working for a team, you're presenting it as they want it to be presented. And so that's where maybe more of the entertainment side than truly getting to be the journalist side of it. So I think in the sports world, that is where it is different, where it's can be more one-sided than another. You have to wear those two hats. Yeah.
That's a burgeoning area of job opportunities for our soon-to-be graduates, is going to work for the team.
Right.
What advice do you have for them for that? What are they getting into when they go do that?
What I just said, be prepared to kind of have to put some things aside where if you want to, one time I made an injury report announcement, totally not allowed. And it seems a little crazy, but at that point you would think the fans are already here, they're expecting to see this player, reports have already come out, but I personally was not allowed to deliver that news, even if it was common fact. So just prepare that, but always in your mind and think of a separate report and maybe do that and just keep practicing if it is an entry job, because you want to be able to report how you actually want to report and how we were taught to report. But when you are working for a team, you have to be prepared to have a lot of different people talking to you and in your ears and knowing what you can and cannot do.
One would hope to have the great experience that, Patti, that you had, where the team president says, do your job, and they know what that job is. Yeah. Dennis.
Hello, James Hadnot, senior here in the...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hey, James.
Go for it, James.
Dueling mics.
Students first. Students
first.
Go for it, James.
Okay. Going first then. Like I said, James Hadnot, a senior here in the Newhouse School. And my question is, as you talked earlier about credibility, and as a young reporter about to bud into this new industry, how do you do your best to gain that rapport? So when it comes to sports on news and you have to ask those tough questions as a young reporter, what are you doing to gain that rapport?
It's all about relationships, really, and broader than just sports reporting. That's almost like a life goal. You develop relationships with people, whether it's a working relationship, a personal relationship. There's just got to be trust. And something like Dale just said, always, you're doing a job. And, always kind of let it be known that everything you do is, is for your job. Yes, we might have a personal relationship or we might have a friendly working relationship. And it's nice to build trust and be friends with someone. But at the end of the day, I'm also being paid to do a job. And for the people who don't want you to do your job and want you maybe to take some shortcuts and do this and that, to protect the relationship, if they don't respect the fact that you're trying to do a job, the respect level that I have for that person is not going to be as high, because I'm just trying to do my job. And it is, sometimes it can get touchy if you, develop a friendship with someone. And we just saw in the NBA, and Dale's probably aware of this because it's down in Dallas with Chandler Parsons and Mark Cuban. They were really great friends, and Chandler thought he was going to be a Maverick for life. And, at the end of the day, Mark Cuban didn't think it was great for business, and they kind of had their nasty breakup, for lack of a better term. But it's the same thing with, a reporter and the guy he covers. Yeah, you might have a good personal relationship. You've been working in the market for years. You've seen the guy's kids grow up and whatnot. But if that person always knows that you're trying to do your job to the best of your ability, they should have a certain respect for that. It goes back with Tiger Woods and Tom Rinaldi. It's just, that's how you develop relationships, and, always let it be known that you're a journalist too, and you really take your job seriously.
Elaborate on that for James. Jason, after I'm trying to do my job, what do you say? Because the coach says, your job, man, I let you interview my players. We've gone, I invited you over to my house for the 4th of July picnic. I've answered all your questions. You called me after the game. I didn't get mad when you made that mistake. Come on. After I'm trying to do my job, what do you say? What is your job? How do you explain that to somebody who doesn't know?
It's just, you explain to that person that, I have a responsibility to, inform our viewers. People will tune into our sportscast tonight because they want to know something. If I don't give them the truth or everything that I know, to a level, obviously you always have to be appropriate. There's some things that probably aren't meant to say publicly, especially in certain cases, like the Tiger Woods was going on with him and that kind of stuff. You always have to keep it appropriate, but you have to let people know that you have a responsibility. And it sounds cliche, but it's really true, because if these viewers aren't getting what they think they deserve, they're going to tune into another station. And that has a trickle effect. And, people start watching and your ratings start hit. People lose their jobs for that, The ratings are down, you can lose your job. And so it's a responsibility, and you just have to explain that.
I will say that you would hope the coach or whoever you're covering understands that and respects that. And if they don't, then just make your relationship what it is, because like they're trying to coach a team, you're trying to do your job. So they need to respect that. But to get back to James, on how to actually build a rapport, I think it's really just having confidence, I think is a crucial thing. And it's hard. Yeah, sometimes you're a little bit intimidated. But for me, I think one of the things that I've been doing is just trying to introduce myself to the players or whoever you're covering. First, as you're a person, they're human beings. They're not just a player on the team. I think you have to find a common ground with them, and not just when you're in the middle of a shuffle of everyone going to their locker, because then you just kind of blend into the masses. But if you take a little bit of an interest in their life, or just showing they're more than a baseball player, I think that goes a long way. And then when you do have to talk about something with them, you can go back. You're not just a face that's just appearing for the first time or in the middle of a big group of people throwing microphones in their face. You've already kind of made a connection. So I think put the camera aside, and maybe if you're with your photographer, you put the mic away and just walk up and say, hi, I'm James, or something like that, and just make a little small talk. And they're gonna start to see your face in there, and I think that's how you work to build those relationships, in the locker room especially.
I think that's so key in that what Erika just said, because a lot of times during those difficult situations, it was the relationships that had been developed that helped get through it for both sides.
Yeah.
I think the other word I would add, James, to all this is knowledge. Know your subject. Know your subject matter. They don't necessarily have to like you. You want them to respect you. And there's a difference there.
Thank you. You still got one, Dennis?
Yes.
All right.
Great to see you all here. Could you give some advice to the young reporters what to do when an athlete or coach makes a political statement or takes a political stand? Is it always news? How should they treat that?
Great question.
I guess the first example, I mean, we're seeing these statements all the time. Even if someone's asked the question, it's becoming blown out of proportion, especially in this day and age. But to go to the Colin Kaepernick example, which took over the NFL season, I wouldn't just throw it in my highlight and say, and there's Colin Kaepernick kneeling, like, look at him. Yeah, I think it needs to be addressed in a different tone. And that was bumped way up into our newscast. You know, I was doing packages on the greater realm of it. When Megan Rapinoe was joining in on it, that became a part of it. It became an add-on. It was who's going to be kneeling next. And maybe you don't see it as being a bigger news story, but I don't think you can just kind of diminish it and throw it in as fun sports. I think it has a greater social realm and social aspect.
And remember what Patti said, your personal opinion doesn't really have a place in that type of topic, because your personal opinion might not be the personal opinion of the network you work for. You know, so about Colin Kaepernick kneeling, my job is to say, this is why he's kneeling and this is why he says he's kneeling. I don't get into whether I agree with it, whether I disagree with it, because it's just not an appropriate venue. Now, if I'm talking to a coworker off air and we're just having personal conversation, yeah, obviously, you know, you can maybe state your opinion and stuff, but it's not my job, and it's not really a journalist's job to say whether they agree with it or what he should be doing this or should be doing that. You see it nowadays because there's so many shows that where, you know, people can give their opinion. But in terms of when you're just writing, you know, a story of what happened, or you're on the air reporting news, leave your personal opinion aside and just report what happened.
I think that's an excellent point, Jason.
And, that's good. And great question. And there'll be a lot more discussion of that very topic at 1 o'clock, right? We've got another panel that's almost dedicated specifically to that issue.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that a lot more. Did I see a mic come down to the front row? Yes, I did.
Just going back, one discussion back to James's point, John used the word respect. In the case of relationships between the player, coach, and the reporter, I think it's fine to have friendly relationships, but in terms of friendships, it's always about the professional relationship, and it's a line that gets blurred. When it gets muddied, there can be trouble in that line. I'm thinking back and showing my age here, but in the late 80s, there was an investigation of 3 Mets players in Port St. Lucie, an investigation of a possible rape in the previous spring training. And there were a bunch of beat writers who were petrified that they might be brought in for questioning or subpoenaed if the cases went to court, because they were so friendly with the players. Some even shared living quarters with the players in spring training, and they knew more than they wanted to share with the police officers in terms of what the players were bragging about, talking about the previous spring. And that kind of closeness can lead to trouble. It skews your reporting. We're not their friends. We can be friendly, but we're not their friends. We're not members of the team. We're members of this team. And when you start your job, there will be people on that team that want to co-opt you and make you feel like you're part of their team. There's an incestuous relationship that they'd like to build to have you feel like part of their team. You're a journalist. You're not in public relations for the teams or leagues that you cover. You're a journalist. And I think if you always hold that close, It'll help you formulate your questions and your goals and remind you every single day who pays your salary. And that'll help you get through your season, your week, your story that you're writing or reporting, sorry, John, reporting on here every day.
Adam?
Hi, thank you guys so much for being here, and I don't want to take this back in a little bit heavier of a direction, but when I, started to think about what this was going to be about on my way here, one of the things that came to mind was the shooting at Ohio State a couple months ago. I know there were ESPN reporters that were there for an Ohio State football game, and the way that they took that angle kind of stirred the pot a little bit in the sense of, why in the headline are they talking about all of the football players are accounted for when so many people got injured during this? So when sports turns into news, where does the line get drawn in the sand, do you think, when it comes to the angle being sports versus news and trying to incorporate what you were originally there for versus what the news eventually turns into?
Well, I'm going to go like a little bit of a different path, and I hope someone else can kind of really hit what you're asking. Like, if you think about, I think when sometimes news and sports and the crossing the line, a way of it in a different way is kind of the power of sports and healing. So you can take a big news story and then how it transfers over into a game. I wasn't there for this, but the first Mets game after 9/11 and how that just brought everything together, like the home run, everything that healed that community. And I think that's where, when you're reporting, I'm not just at a Mets game today talking about this game. This is the first game back in New York City after this awful terrorist attack. And I think that's a way of maybe at the Ohio State, where it could be kind of combining the two, just intertwining them, and how they're connected in, it's multi-layered, all these events. So it's not just the sporting event, but it's how it's connected to the bigger realm of it. I hope someone else can kind of add to that, but I think that's kind of...
It's a good question. It's hard to
Yeah.
comment unless I didn't see the reporting on that, so it's kind of
Right.
hard to comment in a sense. If you have reporters on the ground, they're covering the football team, and it was before their semifinal game, right? Against Clemson, I assume? All right, so obviously that's it's a very significant sporting event, and part of this, part of the story and part of, in a sense, advancing the story is, all right, people are going to want, is the football team accounted for? All right, so that's part of the overall coverage. If that became inordinately the focus of the coverage, then I think the balance is inaccurate, right? You've got to try to find that balance, and I'd have to look at it to really give you an opinion on that.
Yeah.
I was going to say, if I can sort of be a panelist for a second, step over here. Don't forget who your audience is, right? If you're the local news station in Columbus, you might end up talking to the school president and the police chief for that. If you're watching ESPN, you're going to want to hear from the coach and what the players are. And so certainly, depending on what your network is and what your audience is and who you're targeting, depends on how you present the story. We're not skipping over facts, and certainly maybe we include the school president a little bit farther down. But in that case, it seems to be perfectly reasonable. If you're tuning into ESPN, your focus is going to be on what happened to the football team. I don't think that's a slight to everybody else who may have been injured. And in the same way, on the local news station, it would be weird to start with the football coach, right? Let's hear from the police chief. That doesn't mean we don't care about the football team, just means we're trying to go target our audience.
ESPN and ESPN and ABC News aren't going to have the same angle. You just, ABC News will probably, here's how many people passed away, here's how many people in the hospital, etc. When you tune into ESPN, okay, no football players were harmed, they'll have everybody tomorrow, etc. It's just, like you said, know your audience, and I don't think one thing is wrong, the other thing is right. It's just, different angles for different networks.
And that probably wouldn't have been the first day of report. right? Was that the game when the game followed?
I can't remember.
Yeah.
I think the shooting itself was in the middle of the week and the game was that.
Right. So then at that point, I think it's okay to kind of take it to a different direction or find a new story, a new angle to it, while it's still keeping the focus on the bigger event that happened.
And it's for at ESPN, the one thing we talked about is right into what Simon said, there are people who are tuning into us for sports, but at the same time, is you can't be tone deaf.
Right.
Right? You know, so it's that, you know, it's it's trying to arrive at the right balance. And it's hard, you know, it's hard to do.
Yeah, Zach.
Hi, I'm Zach. I'm a BDJ major and a sophomore here. And again, thank you guys all for coming. So I have a question. When everybody knows the whole Laramie Tunsil issue that happened last year before the NFL draft, and what happens when timeliness plays such a huge factor in such a groundbreaking story? Obviously, you want all the facts, you want to be credible, but when you're given this video from a hacked Twitter account 15 minutes before the start of the NFL draft, do you report on that and potentially cause this player's draft stock to drop? Or if you don't have all the credible sources yet, do you wait and hold out on reporting it and then watch him potentially get drafted in the top 3 draft picks?
Zach, what's the background? What was the information so everybody knows?
The video surfaced on Laramie Tunsil's Twitter account. His Twitter was hacked, and a video surfaced of him smoking out of a bong.
All right.
Right.
Yeah, there was,
Yeah.
I mean,
It was about as bad as you could get.
yeah, I mean, something like that, it's a great example. I mean, we went into full, you know, scramble mode immediately, and and the phones are ringing. We're calling the assignment desk. We're calling news editors. We're calling, contacts that we have at Ole Miss. We're our correspondents at the SEC network. We're trying to gather as much information as we possibly can. Ultimately, we did show it.
Right.
And it obviously impacted his draft status. There's no question about that. But we wanted to again, corroborate, right? Authentic, do as much as you can, and then there's a decision, right? And we made the decision, and all right, air it because it's it is now part of the story of the draft and of this individual.
As much as you can tell us, what was the information you got that said, yeah, let's do it?
It was a combination of just a variety of sources. Multiple sources, confirming and it's ultimately I made the decision, right? Go with it. But it's a great.
Just kept coming out.
Yeah, it's a great example though, because that was nobody knew anything before that, and then we want to corroborate as a hacked Twitter account, et cetera, that type of thing. I mean, it's you're in a full scramble mode, and again, you want to get it, get it right. But if you feel comfortable, then you go with it.
Going back to the sports versus news thing, I'm just wondering that red alert that you went into because of the content of the video versus some video shows up of him making some great block that we haven't seen before. Same scrutiny?
No, because somebody's making a great play. I mean, that's just that's part of the athletic competition. This is part of this is behavior which is going to cause 32 teams to look at him differently, potentially look at him differently than they had previous to that point.
So
in that video being public, so it's a much different.
Simon. I don't have a question. I just wanted to remind our young students who will be out there as newbies that you don't have to make all these decisions by yourself. This is what your editors are for. This is what your news director is for. When something like this happens, they're there to provide that guidance, to tell you which direction they think we should go on the story or what you should do next. So don't feel that you're out there and all of this stuff is happening and you don't have anybody who you can consult with, because they're there and you should ask those questions. And nobody will blame you or think that you don't know what you're doing because you're saying, hey, this has happened. Which way should we go with this story?
And your former professors, too.
They may not have time to call you, but they should call their editors and their news directors.
Absolutely.
I'm not a journalist. I'm a teacher educator. And I work with teachers a lot who try to bring sports and news into the classroom. Many of the students come in talking about it. And one of the things I wanted to hear you talk about, there's so many, I would call them non-credible choices. Actually, this builds on what the dean just said. You all have editors and things like that. Anybody can put a blog up. Anybody can put a Twitter feed up. And many times, young people don't know the difference between something that's edited, something that's been vetted, as John was saying, and something that's just either a rumor or whatever. And I just was wondering how much of that influence, I mean, how much do you're gritting your teeth and waiting while someone less reputable is putting a story out. I just was curious as to some of the experiences you may have had.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you that, when we first launched MLB Network, Twitter, was really just becoming a news source, and I was personally taken aback that the executive producer was sitting there watching his Twitter feed while we were on the air, and calling out things that he saw on Twitter and saying, oh, you have to do this or say this because people are talking about, the following, and it changed. I mean, the world changed when those kind of sources came out. You don't always know if the Twitter feed is valid. If there are facts, it's just why we've all been talking about. You have to do your homework, but it does influence what you say, and we've had players respond to our reporters on Twitter while we're on the air, and we've put up the tweets, and then they get into a conversation, and it changes. We didn't have that ability before to communicate with somebody without a camera in their home or at their place of business. I mean, it's a different world.
Twitter's become a news source. I mean, that's the reality of it. By the way, it starts at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, right? Unlike anything we've ever seen before. But it's a news source. Athletes use it significantly. Owners, I mean, Jim Irsay, the owner of the Colts, he's on Twitter a lot. He must drive his public relations people crazy. But so it's a platform that you need to monitor.
I wanted
then there are blogs and there are others that in the eyes of our editors have far less credibility, and they may go with something, and we're going to be very, very cautious before we just pick that up, given we think the reputation of the source and reliability of the source.
I wanted to piggyback on Dean Brandon's point. You aren't alone. I'm an NBA reporter for ESPN, and we have so many group emails where we're trying to track down something that is out on TMZ or it's out on Twitter, and maybe we get really close and we think we have enough to put this on ESPN's website, but more often than not, we don't. And so you're sharpening your reporting skills, you're reaching out to any sources that you can to try to corroborate, and that goes on way more often than we get stories published. And you're gonna go through those processes on a daily basis, most likely.
And I want to add on that too for a second. When you're not alone and if something happens, and this is totally in line with our discussion, but if something happens when you're out and you don't know what direction to go in, I think just calling desk, calling producers, and just seeing what they want you to do. I mean, we still have someone to report to. We can't just start talking whatever we'd like to. But for example, I was just out at a feel-good story with the New York Liberty WNBA team. They were invited a young girl out there who wasn't allowed to play on her school team. And then in the midst of it, I go from a happy story to all of a sudden she gets expelled from her school because there's a litigation happening with her parents and the school. So right there, the whole thing just kind of shifts, and then it becomes a major news story every following day in our newscasts.
We have about 10 minutes left, so we got one question here and then another one there. So go.
Just to follow up on the Twitter as news theme, because I've always wondered, or lately wondered, if there is conversation between reporters, editors, news directors on what aspect of social media is sports news. Antonio Brown Facebooking live from the locker room, that's news. A Twitter beef between, say, two NBA players I question whether or not that is news. And I'm just wondering what kinds of conversations happen between reporters, editors, news directors on what constitutes Twitter news and what you're going to report on.
I think you have to always keep in mind what your viewership cares about and what will, get them to tune in. That's probably always the foundation. Obviously, you keep your integrity with everything, but, what are our viewers talking about? What do they want to know about? Maybe something, like you said, NBA Twitter beef, maybe between two players, maybe that's relevant, in that city. But in a different market, that would probably maybe be something petty to kind of report on, like that's not news. You just have to always base things off what do you believe your viewers will be interested in and get them to tune in and that sort of thing.
And I think it's important to report it that it is on Twitter. It's social media. It's not, a news report. There's a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And keeping that, most networks now have their social media center. It's social media reporting versus other reporting, and there's a differentiation between both of them.
Part of it is who does it, right? Who's the Twitter war? If it's Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant, guess what? That's news. ESPN's going with that. If it's the 12th guy with the Sacramento Kings and the 12th guy with the Milwaukee Bucks, maybe that's relevant in those two markets, but that's, outside of that, it's irrelevant.
Or just like what a tweet can mean, or an Instagram post can mean, because LeBron James, I cover him, he has 26 million Twitter followers. The NBA Finals average 20 million viewers. So anytime he jumps on his phone, more people see that thought than see him blocking Steph Curry in Game 7. And so I try to remind myself of that it already has an audience. So then you want to give context to the people who may see it through the means of Twitter or Instagram or whatever.
Sure, go ahead.
Hi, thank you guys for being here again. I'm Nicole Weaving. I'm a freshman BDJ student here. My question is related to this whole conversation about what your audience wants to see and sports over, in this case, national news. June 17th, 1994, a famous day in history because that was the white Bronco chase, but also there was so many important sports events that day. For a source like ESPN, when do you think, and just speaking in general as well, when do you think that you decide to possibly talk about a national news story that may not exactly be sports related over sports if it has that much dominance?
I think it's, again, it's what the magnitude of the story, and magnitude in every respect. There were a couple times that I can distinctly recall. The first Gulf War, when we launched Operation Desert Storm, and it was on a Monday. I was on my way out of the office, and somebody called me and said, we just, initiated the Operation Desert Storm. So I went right back to the control room, and we actually had a Connecticut-Syracuse basketball game. And the president was going to speak to the country at 9 o'clock. So I'm on the phone with the president of ESPN, all right, we're debating what to do, what not to do. And ultimately, the game actually went into overtime. So we turned the president's speech around and we communicated that to our audience. We also directed the audience to ABC News if they wanted to see that live. So that was one. The other was 9/11. When that happened, we just simulcast with ABC News for a number of hours because at that point, obviously sports is immaterial. And then as time progressed, we got a variety of commissioners and sports leaders on the phone because, the NFL, began to cancel games that week, et cetera, that type of thing, MLB. So it was within 9/11 just how kind of the sports industry was reacting to that.
Right.
So those are two examples that I can give you.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's, if the news that you're speaking of, if it becomes bigger than sports and you almost feel like, why am I talking about this right now? There's something so much greater going on. You kind of just use your common sense. Like another example, when Osama bin Laden was killed, I'm pretty sure it was Phillies versus Mets.
Sunday Night Baseball.
Sunday Night Baseball, they're on air,
Dan
and
Schulman.
the crowd is chanting USA, USA, and you could hear it on your TV. And at that point, I can't remember who exactly was calling the game.
Dan Schulman.
Yeah, at that point, you got to talk about that. You have people, most people at home, if they didn't know what happened, they're wondering why is everyone chanting USA right now, and that's your cue,
But we waited until ABC News had confirmed.
Yeah.
And then that's exactly what Dan said, is, we've just received, confirmation from ABC News that, Osama bin Laden has been killed. But it's another great example.
Any other questions? I had one more, sort of talking about news and journalism and making sure you confirm information before you get it. Having that uncomfortable conversation with a coach who you might be friendly with but not friends with. What about the pressure from the fans? Your sports consumers are probably more knowledgeable about that subject than any other subject, right? If you're a Jets fan, you know the Jets forwards and backwards are watching you, and they've also read everything available for it, right? And sometimes if you come up and talk about a story that might not cast the team in a good light, what if they get mad? That's my team. Why are you talking poorly about my team?
And they'll let you know on Twitter and Facebook and everything else how angry they are.
And your email.
Yeah.
And email.
And if they're like real passionate fans about that team, they're probably thinking those thoughts maybe anyway, if you have to address the truth. But I had a great conversation last night with both Dale and Carrie, and we were talking just about that. How do you deliver the news when you have an informed audience? But I don't think you should ever, assume that everyone knows who you're talking about. Why we in our discussion we were saying, does it really hurt to say, Jets head coach Todd Bowles rather than just Todd Bowles? Maybe not everyone knows who that is. So just adding in those extra words, so you're not talking down to people, but everyone can kind of be on the same page, whether you're, not talking down to them, but also not, it's just that balance. Words aren't coming out properly here, but the balance of talking to your audience, keeping them informed, but also bringing others into the conversation so we can all know what's going on.
And that's part of fandom to some degree, right? I mean, as at ESPN, it would always be the Michigan fans, you're just, you're pro Ohio State. The Ohio State fans, you're pro Michigan now that Harbaugh's there. You're pro Alabama, or, Deflategate, when we reported on that. Patriots fans, the reaction we got from them, it was rough. We had sent some reporters up there, and we sent them up with security.
Right.
So you got to, fandom's great. At the same time as, you've got to take certain things, seriously, so that if you're putting people in the field, is that they feel, that you're looking out for their best interests in all respects.
And
Yes, sure.
I'll take the privilege of asking you one last request. Could you give some advice to my seniors about how they can be successful in that first job that they're all preparing to go out and do?
Yeah, I guess the first and foremost, be a sponge, learn from everyone, whether it be the meteorologist or your news director. Your first job, for a lot of cases, it'll be humbling, you'll realize how far you have to go. But you have to make everything a learning lesson. And, my first job, my first on-air gig, that is, I learned so much in that, year and a half, just because I was always asking questions. And I knew my sports director he was a legend in that market, and he worked for the college team too, calling games. And so whether it's something as simple as, shooting a package. He taught me so many tricks on how to shoot a package, and then, little subtle things to do while you're on air. Just, that's really what that, your first job is, is a stepping stone. So the most important thing is to learn, learn from it. It's just like almost like you're still in school. You learn and use it, and I still use, tips that he gave me from my first week on the job today, 5 years later. So just be a sponge.
Yeah, and just work really, really hard. Pretty simple. You're probably going to be working long hours or bad days or not have much of a life, really, but it's only going to be for a certain amount of time. And I think make the best of whatever situation you're in, and also just be kind to everyone. Say hello to people, talk to people, because you never know who down the line you're going to run back into, or maybe they're going to be a manager at some other place. You never know who can help you in life, and likewise who you can help as well. So I think just talk to people, ask questions, soak in as much as you can, as much knowledge, and also just work your tail off.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say your attitude and your attention to detail, and just wanting to learn. But really, it's your approach and how you deal with people. Have that enthusiasm, have that, just I'm willing to do anything and anything approach, and people will respond to that. If you come in thinking like you know it all already because Newhouse gave you a great background and you know everything there is to know about television, and I've experienced some of those students, you don't, and you're always learning. I've been in this business way too long, but I will tell you, there's just not a day or a week that goes by that I'm not still learning things. Technology is constantly changing. I'm learning different area, different sport now, and you're just always learning. And so be willing to learn and ask questions, and don't be afraid to ask questions, because nobody's going to assume that you know everything.
I think great advice from all three panelists. My first job at ESPN, it was so low it was below sea level, I think. that's how low it was. But be a sponge. Do your job really, really well. Okay, do that, because your manager will become the best advocate for you. And I've seen too many people at various levels of every organization. They're so worried about getting promoted, they forget to do the job they're supposed to do. So do your job really, really well. Then when you get opportunities to do more, do that. And I agree with what Erika said. You know what? Be a good colleague. I mean, would you rather work with somebody who's a good person who you enjoy working with, or someone who is a jerk? Right? I mean, it's don't overcomplicate things. You want be a good colleague to work with. That's impactful.
And treat everybody with respect. I'm really big on that, because it really means a lot.
Yeah.
And that means everybody. That means even people that are the building maintenance people, to the president of the league or the network, whoever it may be, and get to know them, because you never know when you might need that person, or that person might have information for you, or might be able to help you out with something. And it's just. If you treat people with respect, they'll treat you back with respect. It's kind of my number one key point.
And do that as you grow through an organization as well. I mean, one of the great business leaders, in my opinion, in the last 30 years in American business is George Bodenheimer at ESPN. George treated everyone with genuine kindness. And the respect that 7,000 people had for him was absolutely amazing and galvanizing. But he always treated everyone with kindness and respect. And I'm getting a whole bunch of heads of former ESPN colleagues of mine that are nodding, yep.
All right, great, very good. Thank you. Let's thank John and Patti and Jason and Erika. And thank you all for coming, and hope you attend the other panels that are coming up later today. Thank you.